Hello and welcome to another video tutorial. And in this tutorial, we are going to talk about BlackArch. What is BlackArch and how to install it? So basically, what is BlackArch? If you go to the website, you will see that BlackArch is basically a penetration testing distribution, the same thing as it says here in the title, that is based upon Arch Linux. That's the first thing they state. They have 2246 tools in it, and of course, if you don't want to install the BlackArch from scratch, you can actually, if you have Arch Linux on your machine, or if you have a virtual machine with an Arch Linux, you can do another thing. You can actually upgrade it to BlackArch, or basically do some installation scripts, which will then make it uh, basically BlackArch. And of course, you'll be able to use it for penetration testing. So the first thing you need to do when you start with BlackArch basically is to find it and download it. So this is the website, as you can see here, and of course there is a downloads link on top. And if you click on it, you get to download the different versions. So you can download over images already, which are basically virtual machines. You can download, of course, live ISO, or you can download installing from an ISO. You have different options here. The thing that I've downloaded is BlackArch 64-bit Wi-Fi ISO. The thing we can do with it is basically either work with it live from the ISO file, or we can actually install it. And the installation presumably will take less because we have all the packets already in the ISO instead of downloading them from the internet. So this is what I did. Of course, if you don't have enough space on your machine, or if you don't want to install all the packets, you can download there is a net install ISO, which is quite small. This is basically an installation that will run the basics of the system, and then it will actually build upon that from the internet. This is the net installer. There are many different net installers for almost all the Linux Unix distributions, and they're quite small. That's the idea, basically, to have you started. You have networking, you have some basic functionality, you have bash, and then of course some other tools would be there, and then you can go on from that and just choose what you like to add to that system. So that's also a pretty good way to do that. There is of course a way how to add this how to write that image. And for our test and for our demonstration, we're not going to use that command. We can see that OVA file here has 30 gigs of size, which is a pretty good idea how big would the installation be when we're done. So when I'm creating a virtual machine, I'm going to dedicate at least 30 gigs. Since I have a lot of space on that machine particularly, I'm going to dedicate even more space. So when you start downloading, just of course click on the live CD. You're going to be asked where you want to download these, and just click save. It's going to download the file. It's going to take some time because it's 12 gigs, and then you will get to the next station, the next step. This is something I'm going to show you next. So the next thing you will see when you already have the file downloaded and you have VirtualBox installed on your machine, in order to create a virtual machine that would be running the Arch Linux, would be the VirtualBox screen. And this is the very basic of the VirtualBox graphical user interface. So to begin with, we need to create a new virtual machine. So click on New, and we will call it BlackArch. By writing Arch, VirtualBox already knows what I'm going to use, so it recognizes Arch, and it's suggesting to be a version of Arch Linux and 64-bit based on my CPU. So it's pretty smart, and of course I like these options, so click Next. Now here you have to provide it with the amount of memory you're going to need. So I'm going to use 4 gigs of RAM for this kind of a machine. Hopefully that will be enough. To select the virtual disk or to create new one, of course I'm going to create a new one. I don't have one for this machine. To option here is to choose the virtual disk image type. Basically the VDI is the default, the native one for VirtualBox disk image, so go with that. And then here we have to choose if it's going to be dynamically or allocated, or it's going to be a fixed size. So in most of the cases, dynamically allocated makes more sense, because if I assign it a 40 gigs of space and the system only uses 15 gigabytes of space, the size of the file that is going to be created on my physical machine is going to be only 15 gigabytes of space. And when I increase that size, I mean if I add more information to that virtual machine and it expands the size, it is going to expand the file size on my physical machine. So it grows with the actual usage and the need. That's pretty much better than just having it allocated to 40 gigs, and then 40 gigs of the disk space on the physical machine will disappear, and um, there will be a 40 gigabyte image file on your disk for that virtual machine. You don't need that at the beginning. You might not never get to that size that you have initially allocated. So keep that in mind when you're setting that up. Going next, and now the size would be, I'm assigning it 40 gigabytes, and as we saw on the website, there was a 30 gigabyte of OVA image, so that should suffice. And that's pretty much it. Now, if I want to boot it, I just double click on it and it will start. It's going to ask me for a bootable medium, and I'm going to provide it with the ISO file, and luckily it's going to start. But first of all, I'm just going to go through the settings and prepare it for what I'm going to actually use it for. Going to settings, when it has been selected, I'm going to share the clipboard here. Bidirectional, meaning that I can copy from the host to the virtual machine and vice versa. And then I'm going to enable the drag and drop function here, which is also going to be bidirectional, meaning that, again, the same thing. I won't have any description added or any encryption for that matter. So just going to system, I'll keep the memory the same size. I don't need the floppy disk. I don't know why they still keep it here. Nothing else here to change. Maybe I can add another thread, another CPU for that machine, make it a little bit faster and more responsive. And then on acceleration, I won't change anything. I'll leave the default virtualization configurations here. For display, I don't really need a visual adapter or anything that will produce some effects or anything like that. So I'll just keep it to the minimum. And I don't want to enable remote display or recording, so won't change anything here. And then moving to storage, I have an empty optical drive tray, and I have a disk which is a 40 gigabytes with a actual 2 megabyte size at the moment. I can, of course, if I like to, I can make it solid state, and I'm running that on a solid state disk, so it probably will be a bit faster. Hot pluggable if you're emulating or virtualizing some sort of servers, anything like that. So functionality here if you like to. And there are a lot of SATA ports here. You can add up to 29, and basically with 0, it's going to be up to 30 disks. So a lot of options here. Of course, to add more disks, just click on the plus. If you want to remove one, just click on the minus or the X. Audio, nothing to change here. And now on networking, my virtual machines in these situations, I usually like to raise them as a bridged adapter. So I'm going to bridge it to the Ethernet adapter on that host, meaning that they both will be part of the same wireless network, and actually same network for that matter, in my home environment, not just wireless, sorry. So that's the way I like it to be, because this way the virtual machine will be accessible from other machines in my environment, because I'm running that on the Windows host, but I have a Linux machine, a Linux laptop right next to it, and I want to, if I like to, I want to SSH from that Linux to the BlackArch. And if I'm doing that, I'm going to have to do some port forwarding and firewall rules, things like that. I don't need that. If I just bridge the adapter, the BlackArch will get an IP address from the same network, and the only thing I'll have to worry about will be allowing it on the BlackArch instead of allowing it on the host as well. Pretty straightforward. I have only one adapter. I don't need anything else for that test at the moment. I will enable promiscuous mode, of course. I will allow it. That's what I use when I actually do pen tests. It's really important. Serial ports, I don't use any. USB for now, I'm not going to use any at the moment. Shared folders, don't need that at the moment. And of course, nothing to change on the user interface. So click OK. The settings already applied, and now if I click start, it is going to ask me for a disk to use, and I'm going to give it an option to use from the desktop, this one, and again click start. I'll try to make it a bit bigger, but unfortunately the resolution will be very low because it's still on the group boot menu. So the options here are, I'll read it for you: boot BlackArch Linux, boot it with non-freeze, and then you can boot the existing OS if you have any. I don't have. And memtest, hardware, reboot, power off. So I'm just going to select boot BlackArch Linux. It is going to go through the booting process. Let me try to increase the size of the window. And one important thing worth mentioning: if your if your pointer gets captured from the virtual machine, and if you haven't done that before, the right control on your keyboard will release it. And this is what it says here in the corner. I don't know if you can see it, but it says here right control. And if you if you push it, it's going to release your mouse, so you can click on the host machine. Otherwise, if I click on the virtual machine, it will capture, in most of the situations, it will capture my mouse, and I'm not going to be able to do anything. So at the login screen, we need to enter the credentials. These credentials are usually provided in the website of BlackArch. You can find them there. So we need to authenticate as a root. So the user would be root. And then for password, we just use BlackArch, the same as the name of the distribution. And we are logged in. So to be able to install it, first of all, we need to right click to get to the menu and open a terminal window. The next thing we need to do once we have, let me just increase the size of that terminal window maybe, or move it here. The next thing we need to do is first of all see if we can find any disks that we have. The command that we're going to use is fdisk-l. This is just for our information. We actually have two partitions here. I'm going to remove these partitions during the installation process, so I'll show you how to make partitions and how to use that. The other thing that we need to do, usually to install BlackArch from a live CD or from a net installer onto a hard drive, there is a script that you can use. The script is called BlackArch install. So this script is actually a very nice way to go through the installation. It is an interactive installation. It's asking you questions and you're providing the answers. It's pretty straightforward, but there is something that you have to keep in mind. There are some versions of the script that are having some bugs or that would require some manual interference with it. So a very easy way to solve that out, because I mean, of course, if you are okay with programming, and if you're okay with scripting, you can go to the, I think it was in user bin maybe. Let me just find the script. Okay, there it is. BlackArch, I think. My bad. It's not CD. It is vim user bin BlackArch install. So you can see the script from here. And of course, you can go and modify the sections that are having problems. Basically, it was, as far as I remember, there was a problem with the creation of the partitions and writing these partition tables. So you can go up here and you can fix it yourself, but the easiest way you can do that is use pacman package manager and just update the script. So what you can do here is just use pacman -s and then provide it with the script you want to update, BlackArch install. Of course, since we don't have the database built yet, so we have to use pacman -sy. It's going to synchronize the package database and it's going to find the latest packet for us. So just give it a couple of seconds. This is something similar to apt-get update. You know, when you're installing packets on Ubuntu or Debian based distributions, you use apt-get or aptitude if you like to. And there is also an aptitude update and aptitude install. So the same thing goes here. So now if we use pacman -s BlackArch install, okay, pacman -s black BlackArch installer, sorry. And it's telling me that there is another version and it's going to need to be, I have to provide yes to get the latest version, and it's just going to update the packet. So that's pretty much it. Now, after we have the newest version, you have the latest version of the installation script, which means that we'll probably won't have to run into any problems or any issues like that. And to start the installation, what you need to do is just type BlackArch install, hit enter, and it starts with the installation. This is the interactive installation. So it's first of all asking you what do you want to install from. Is it going to be from a repository online? Is it going to be from an ISO, the disk that we already have, or the ISO that we already mounted and we booted from? Or is it going to be from a source using some other online source? So the one that I'm going to go for, since I already downloaded 12 gig ISO file, is going to be the ISO. But of course, if you've downloaded the net installer, that will be your choice to run it and install it from the online repository source. It's up to you. Depends on what your situation is. So for me, it's number 2. And then the type of the installation could be quiet, which means that it's not going to produce much of an output, or it could be verbose. And the verbose one would produce more information. And of course, I want to see what's going on, so I want to be uh, aware of which packet is being installed. And of course, if there are any warnings, any issues, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to produce any errors that I'm looking for. But even if there is a warning that some module is not okay or something like that, I want to see that. So I'm going to choose verbose. That's pretty straightforward. Now you have to set the locale. For our case, the default one is English, United States, UTF-8. I'm just going to hit enter. It's going to keep that. I don't want to make any changes. And then the key map would be again the default one, US for the United States English. Hit enter. It's going to use the default one. Now we have to provide it with a hostname. So if you want to do it something special, if you're using that for penetration testing, you can call it hackbox, I don't know, crackbox, whatever you like. For my case, that's just going to be BlackArch because it's just what I'm going to use. And now it is looking for hard drives. Remember the fdisk command that we ran earlier? It detected the hard drive like SDA1 and SDA2. So first of all, the SDA is the physical actual hard drive that I have attached, or the virtual in our case, but still it's supposed to be the physical drive that I have attached to that virtual machine. In the Unix, Linux, of course, distributions, disks are represented by this SD, and they letter behind that just for the uh, actual drive. Basically, for example, SDA, SDB, SDC, SDD, and so on and so forth. That's also applying for USB drives. So you can have two hard drives on your machine and a USB drive. And the hard drive would be, for example, SDA and SDB, and then the USB would be SDC. If you have an optical drive, it would be SDE. So these drives are all having letter representations. SD is the beginning, and then you have something like A, B, C, D, and so on. And they are alphabetically used. So in my case, I have the physical drive, not any partitions or anything, just the whole drive, which is SDA. And it's asking me on which drive do you want to install that. If I had two, it was going to say SDA and SDB, and I have to choose which one. So for my situation, that's pretty simple. It's SDA. And now it's asking me if I want to do a dual boot. So if I had two drives and if I had Windows on one of them and I provide it with the other one, and it's, I have Windows on it, I want to have an option to choose which operating system to load when I restart. This is the place where you have to click yes. It's going to detect the Windows system and it's going to detect that there is a master boot record for the other drive. And then in group, when it's creating the boot sequence is going to suggest, it's going to give you an option to choose which one you'd like to boot, the master boot record for the Windows one or the boot for the Linux one. So I don't have one, and no. Now it's going to go through the partitions and it's asking me if I want to create root, swap, and of course boot partitions. I want to do that. Yeah, of course, zero partition table. Let's just clean that out. Going to use the DOS label type, and now I am presented with the whole drive. As you can see here in the menu, I have free space. It starts and ends. These are the sectors that it starts and ends. I have the total number of sectors, which are represented by the 40 gigabyte of size behind that. And there is also the UUID, which is the unique ID of the drive, and the file system that is ext4, which is basically Linux extended partition, extended file system. So first of all, I'll need to create the boot drive. So just go new, and for the boot drive, I'm going to dedicate 500 megabytes. When you're creating partition, of course, I can, if I put G, it is 500 gigabytes. If it's M, it's 500 megabytes. So if I'm creating a partition and I don't know the exact number in kilobytes or anything like that, or the sectors, just go for 500 M, and it will automatically understand that it's 500 megabytes. The next thing is, should it be primary or extended? Of course, in this situation, it's primary. We're going to boot from it in any case. So that's pretty much it. And now we have def sda1. This is our first 500 megabyte partition, which is with a Linux file system. Now I want to make it bootable, so with it selected, I'm moving the arrow keys to the bootable place and just hit enter, and it's going to flag it as bootable. As you can see on the boot, the second column, it has a wildcard on the boot, which means that this is a bootable partition. And of course, I will need to create another one. Let's just say I need one for the swap. And the swap on this machine will be 1 gigabyte. And it's pretty straightforward. Just write 1G and it will know that it's 1 gig. It's again a primary partition. It is created. And now there is a little bit of a difference. So here I will have to choose the type of the partition. And when you go to type, these are all the options you have when you're creating partitions. And of course, most of those are not usable for you, as you can see here. There are some FAT30, FAT32, for example, FAT16, uh, everything you can think of. There is different Windows variants, whatever. For the one we're looking for, usually Linux is 83 as far as I remember, yes, and 82 in our case is the swap Linux and Solaris. So just select swap, and it is going to change the type. As you can see there on the last column, it is Linux swap / Solaris. And the last thing we need to do is create the actual root partition where our files will be installed and where our machine will be running from. So just hit on the empty space, on the free space, hit enter, and it's suggesting you the full size. Just hit enter again. We don't want to split it anymore. It is primary partition one more time. And now it has created the actual root file system. We don't need to change the type of it because by default it starts with Linux partitions. So now these changes need to be written into the partition table. You have to go to write, hit enter, and it's telling you that these are the changes that you're making. Are you sure you want to write this in the partition table? You can lose the partition table from here if you're working with a partition that has some information on it, and you'll be screwed. So of course you can restore the partition in some of the ways, but you don't need to do that if you're not sure. So of course we are sure it's an empty disk in any case. Just hit yes, the partition table has been altered. And now we need to quit this too. We don't need to change anything else in the partitions. You can see we have SDA1, SDA2, and SDA3. These are actually logical partitions on the physical drive. That's how you have to imagine that. So we have the disk, which is SDA, and when you split it onto pieces and different partitions for different places and different stuff, it is using actually a numerical abbreviation. It's using a numerical digits to at the end of the actual partition to represent at the end of the actual disk to represent the actual partition. So that's why we have SDA 1, 2, and 3. If we had additional disk like SDB with 2 partitions, we would have SDA 1, 2, and 3, and SDB 1 and 2. So I hope that's clear. Okay, just quit this one. It's going to look through the partitions, and now it's asking us to encrypt the root drive or the root partition. I'm not going to do that. This is my testing machine. I don't need the encryption here. Just hit no. And now it's actually asking if these actually are the partitions. It's listing all that it found, and it's now asking me to provide it with the actual boot partition. And to do that, just type def SDA1. That's the boot partition that we dedicated. Hit enter. What would be the file system on it? It's going to be the latest Linux journaling system. That's ext4. Hit enter. And now it's asking for the root partition. My root partition in this case was dev sda3. Don't forget to provide it with the dev folder, the full path, because it's not working with the relative path. If you just type sda1 or sda3 or anything, it's not going to find these partition files. So keep that in mind, provide it with the full path. So root is again ext4, 4, and then we have swap, which is dev sda2, and now enter. And this is what it says. Do you want to, are the changes correct? Partition are correct. Okay, yes. Formatting partitions, you have to click yes here. You have to select yes. You can't go further if you don't format them. So keep that in mind. Don't think of saying no. Hit yes, and now it starts making partitioning, starts making tables, starts making file systems. It's going through the information. And it's already done with that, starting to prepare what kind of information would be put into these partitions. Luckily, it's dumping that data from the live ISO. Of course, it's going to take some time, but hopefully it will be faster than from the internet. It says that it requires at least 40 gigs of free space to install, which I think of we predicted that we already have that space, and now it's just copying information from the disk to the proper places from the ISO or the emulated optical disk to the places on the hard disk that is supposed to be using. There is a representation on how it is supposed to look. How would your drive look, the root disk? And as you can see, 45 megabytes for the etc. Home is empty, of course. OPT is like 7 gigs. Root is just 33 megabytes, and the user folder is like 31 gigabytes, I guess. And then 580, almost 80 gigabytes for the var folder. So it's going to take some time. And of course, it's going to take some space. And what we can do while this is going on, let me just move that here. And I'm going to open another terminal window and see if we can do -h and see what we have mounted. This command will give you df will give you the disk information, what's mounted and what's the size. If you use -h, will be human readable, and meaning you'll be able to see, gigs, megs, things like that, instead of just seeing 5 to 20 digit numbers here. So this is the file system. This is all actually running either from the CD drive or from memory. What we're looking at here is SDA3 and SDA1. SDA3 is our root partition. It's mounted here. The size is 38 gigabytes. And the space that's actually used at the moment is 4.3 gigs. We have 32 free, of course, and that's the boot partition. The boot partition, I don't really expect it to grow anymore, but if we do again this command, we will see that the root partition is growing up. It's now 6 gigs. This is basically a way you can monitor if how the process is going and get information on how much space is taken. I think if you do that with the SDA, it's just going to give you the SDA information, SDA1 maybe. Yeah, okay, so if I do that with SDA3, it's just going to give me, you can provide it with the partition you're looking for when you do the df-h command, and it's going to give you information for that partition specifically. And now you can pipe that, watch that, of course, like this, and it's going to update every couple of seconds with the actual information from the system. And it's I don't know if it makes any sense to you, but for me it's useful. I like to have more information when I'm doing something. So uh, this is not that informative for me. Maybe 9 gigs. It's pretty the same. It's pretty much the same thing here and here, but it's another way to just monitor the process of the installation. So I guess this one should grow up to 30. What is it? 38 gigabytes or something like that. Almost fill the entire disk, and hopefully that disk will be enough. If it's not enough, I'll have to stop the video and do that on a slightly bigger disk, and then proceed from here. So luckily that should suffice. Okay, I'll pause the video here and I will come back to you guys when the installation is on its next step, because we will have some other stuff to do before we complete that. And there is no point of you watching the screen how the percentage is moving and how the actual disk space is being taken. So, okay, pausing here and I'll be back in a second. Okay guys, the installation is finished. I haven't touched anything and it just stopped right here. It's asking me for a password. As you can see here, the use space is 38 gigs. Let me just see if I can get more information for you. -h. Oh, sorry, df -h. Here's what we have. The available space on the this one, the boot didn't move, and the whole disk that we have created, the root folder, is full. So basically, when you're doing that, use more than 40 gigs of space. Now it's asking me for a new password, basically for the root account. So I'm just gonna write a password just for my case. It's just going to be test. I need to repeat that, and I didn't do that right. Okay, so now it's actually setting up a normal user account. Do I want that or do I do not want that? I would like to have a normal user account just for the purpose of this demonstration. Yes, username is tester. It's taking some time to create the user. Okay guys, we did get an error message earlier about not being able to create a username, a normal user. We just created the root one, and I think the problem was that the actual space of the disk on the disk was all taken. It was a full disk. Unfortunately, 40 gigabytes is the limit, the minimum that you can do, and you have to take into consideration the swap space that you have to provide if you want to have swap, of course, and the boot space that you have to provide. So my suggestion would be go for at least 50 gigs of space for that installation. If you have more space, better off using more space. The reason for that is that this machine is going to run scans, is going to run tests. All these programs that you're going to use for scans and tests, they tend to create temporary files. Excuse me. So, for example, if you're running a scanner and it's going to go through a lot of, for example, through a big word list, or it's going to create a huge database because you are actually spidering a huge website, things like that are taking space, and if you don't have enough space on the machine, they usually use the temp of this of the drive, because they want to use that space to create this information and then compile it all into a report and print it out. So they would need temporal space, and then they will need normal space. Basically what I'm trying to say is, if you have more storage, if you have more gigs, just provide it with 60, 80, even 100 gigabytes if you're going to really use this BlackArch installation heavily. If you're going to run scans with it, pen test with it, and all of that. So with that in mind, I did that. I actually did the same thing, but this time I started the machine with a 50 gigabyte disk installed, attached, and I went through the absolutely same installation. Everything was the same up to this moment, but the only difference is that I did install that on a 50 gigs drive. So let me just show that to you. If I do df-h, you can see that the SDA3 is actually 48 gigs because I did provide for a swap and boot, but the use space is 43 gigabytes and I have 2 gigabytes available. So even 50 gigs, it's a bare minimum for that operating system. Keep that in mind. So with that out of the way, let's just move with the providing the root password, which is in my case test. Now it's asking me to create a new user, and this is where we failed the last time because we didn't have enough space on the drive. And if I'm right and I hit yes, it should go properly well. So the user is tester, same thing as before, but this time it's setting up a tester account. Added the tester account, it's asking me for a password again. So obviously the problem there was that we didn't have enough space. Keep that in mind. And even for future references, if you happen to have some sort of a strange error message on a Linux machine, uh, there isn't an actual warning that you would be able to see on the main screen that there isn't enough space. I mean, probably if you go through the kernel log or the syslog or something like that, or the dmask, you see that there isn't enough space, some notifications. But in general, you won't see a flashing icon here, like for example here, or something like that, or some notification that is going to tell you that you are running out of space. So if you actually work on a Linux machine and for some reason you see some stupid problem, you don't see any logic behind it and you don't understand why it's happening, check out the free space on that system. Keep that in mind. So the default time zone for my case, I'll just use UTC. Of course, you can enter the time zone you have. Let's just use UTC in this situation. And now it's setting up the subzone. So UTC, these are all the options, and okay, let's see where is, for example, let's just use UTC again. You can provide your subzone here, of course, based on your location if you want to, or you can use UTC. It's up to you. Okay, Black Linux installation successful, and it's saying that your system needs to be actually, it's ready, your system now, and then it's flashing hack the planet, and we are done. So theoretically, if we remove the network drive or if we remove the ISO, here it is, if we remove the ISO and just reboot the machine, we are going to boot from the drive. So to remove the ISO, you need to go to devices. I won't be able to show it to you, but on devices, go to optical drive and just click on remove virtual, remove the disk or the image that you have. Now just type reboot, and luckily it will restart and boot from the disk, or maybe not. Okay, let me just see if I can do it from the menu. Okay, there is right click and restart. It's taking some time, probably because I didn't remove the disk on time. I actually removed it beforehand. Maybe I should have left it there. Okay, if you end up in this situation and you don't know what's happening, but you kind of did everything right, and you want to just go to the machine menu and just click on reset, and it's going to reset the machine and boot it from scratch. So 1 second, as you can see here, let me just increase the size of that screen a little bit. There it is. As you can see here, we don't have any optical drive installed, any ISO that we can boot from, and we still have the actual bootloader from group here. What it means is that this is booting from the hard drive. So just click on BlackArch Linux. It's going to boot, and it's done. It's pretty simple. So just use again root if you want to, and you can log in with the root password and user, and you can go with, of course, tester, the one I created, password test, and we're in. And as you can see here, we are running at the UTC time. Everything seems fine, and let me just check out what's the current state of the disks and what's going on. So df-h will give me the information of the mounted drives. We have SDA1, which is the bootloader. There is a 50 megabyte boot image there, and then we have the SDA3, which is the actual drive that we are running the system on, which has 2.7 gigs of disk space available, and it's 48 gigs already taken. And the other thing we can do is who am I, just to verify I'm tester, and this is basically it. We've booted from this hard drive, and this is the complete installation. Another thing you can do, I'm not sure if this will work, fdisk -l, but it usually asks for root, so let's just use let's just go to root and then just type fdisk -l, and you will see that these are the only drives we have here. Because if we had the virtual disk, if you had the image here, we will see that as well. Let me just try to add that quickly. I've inserted it. It doesn't show up df-h because it's not mounted. But fdisk -l will show you what are the disks that we have. So we have the swap one, we have the boot one, and then the actual drive that we have used, that we've been using. So that's pretty much it, installing BlackArch Linux on the virtual machine. Remember we were using VirtualBox for this kind of demonstration. Again, I want to stress on the actual disk space that you have to use. Just go with the 50 and above gigabytes, because you are going to need that information to be stored. You're going to need that space for that information. And then, of course, once you have that ready, of course, before the installation, make sure you update the BlackArch installation, the BlackArch installer script. It's really important. It's going to be better for you, and it will skip some bugs that you might end up with. So let me just move that screen. Somehow it doesn't show very well. So update the installer and just go with installation. It is pretty straightforward, and you'll be able to use it on your Linux machine. Actually, on your Windows or Linux machine, whatever you like. VirtualBox is cross-platform. It's actually created, it's Java, so you can actually run it on Windows, Unix, Linux, Mac, whatever you like, and you can have a virtual instance of BlackArch on any kind of a system you want to. So that's pretty much it, and I hope you liked the video, and of course I hope you learned something new. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Subscribe for more videos, and goodbye.